Did Pope Francis approve for an Anglican Mass to be celebrated at St. John Lateran's Basilica? Stick around to find out. Hey, everybody, welcome back to Reason and Theology. Your host, Michael. On a Friday, I want to review Taylor Marshall's video spreading the lie that Pope Francis allowed a fake mass by a fake bishop on an altar in Rome. However, I do agree that it would be a fake mass and a fake bishop, since it was an Anglican bishop who celebrated the liturgy, which I think is tragic. That certainly should not have been allowed. And however this happened, there was somebody who certainly dropped the ball in light of the fact that Anglican masses are invalid per Pope Leo XIII due to the invalidity of their order. So this is certainly an issue. It needs to be corrected. It doesn't ever need to happen again, because at the end of the day, this is simulating a mass. It's not actually a mass itself. So I agree with the fake mass and fake bishop part, but the claim is Pope Francis allowed it to take place at St. John Lateran's Basilica. And this is a lie. This is spreading a lie, misinformation, and stirring people up in their passions to get people all, angry and upset with Pope Francis. I want to take a look at this video here. But I'm doing this because multiple people within maybe an hour of Taylor Marshall releasing his video contacted me, nearly 10, at least that I can actually count off the top of my head here. About 10 within an hour were asking me to comment on this, not only because of the lie that's being promoted, but also because Taylor Marshall in the video does question whether or not Pope Francis is the Pope. But I see some very serious problems in it. And of course, this lie is spreading all over social media. And now, as you could imagine, the Orthobros, that is some of the more toxic online Orthodox apologists, are trying to use this against Catholic and saying, look, your Pope approves of fake Anglican masses and stuff like that. And so they're, of course, watching radical traditionalist Catholics who are spreading this lie, and they're trying to use it against us. So once again, the radical traditionalists are wreaking havoc upon the church, stirring people's passions up and falsely accusing the Holy Father. Truly tragic. Let's go ahead and start watching a few minutes of this, and then I am going to go to some news reports that have come out exonerating Pope Francis and kind of explaining what happened here. Let's start at the very beginning. I'm going to share my screen so that you can see the video. And please let me know, by the way, if you are unable to hear the audio whenever this begins playing, and that way I can figure out what's going on. Okay, so you should be able to see Taylor Marshall on the screen. This is the very beginning of the video. Let's start. Again, let me know in the comment section if y'all cannot hear the audio.
Pope Francis and the powers that be in Vatican City have allowed fake bishops, fake priests to celebrate a fake mass, a fake Eucharist in the most sacred church in Rome, the Lateran Basilica.
All right, so already you can hear it in the opening, and also the title of the video is an accusation that Pope Francis allows fake mass by fake bishop on altar in Rome. So already Taylor Marshall is falsely accusing the Pope without verifying the information before disseminating this irresponsibly on YouTube. Misleading, 51,000 people so far who have watched the video. Truly, truly sad to see that. But you can, again, see the claim, and it's all throughout the video. Pope Francis has done this. He's approved of it. Somebody even tries to say, well, maybe he didn't know. And Taylor Marshall's like, no, he had to have known because he had a meeting with the bishops later on, even though that doesn't logically follow. It turns out that Pope Francis met with some Anglican bishops, afterwards, or maybe even before. At some point he met with them, but it doesn't necessarily mean that he's aware that this took place or approved of it. And it turns out factually that he was not. So let's continue.
A lot of people think the Vatican is the Cathedral of Rome. No, the Cathedral of Rome is St. John Lateran Cathedral. And you can see right here the Anglican bishops and clergy who are considered to be invalid laymen are allowed to celebrate their fake Eucharist and their fake Mass on a Catholic altar in the mother church, the mother and teacher, Mater et Magistra, the Cathedral of Rome. This is yet again another sacrilege. It's another infiltration, and it hits me right there, real deep, right in the heart. Let's put a knife there, slowly twist.
Yeah, and Taylor Marshall's lack of objectivity here really shows all throughout the video, because he's incredibly emotional all throughout the thing, multiple times repeating how he really is personally offended by this because he's a former Anglican priest. And so why is it that the traditional Latin Mass isn't allowed? You know, SSPX aren't allowed, but then these fake Anglicans are allowed, and he really lays on the rhetoric very thick, but displays the fact that he is not being objective here and did not verify in advance before jumping on YouTube and accusing Pope Francis as the accuser of the brethren, which is a reference to Satan in Scripture, by the way. He's the accuser of the brethren, and therefore, whenever a person engages in that behavior of falsely accusing a person, they are doing the bidding of Satan. But he didn't verify those things because there is this lack of objectivity. This is something that really hits home for him. He's very emotionally wounded by this because he really believes Pope Francis deliberately approved of this. So his argument is like, well, why did I leave Anglicanism? Why did I leave being an Anglican priest if they're allowed to celebrate on the altar? If he had just waited one day, he would have found out the clarification from the Vatican that would have exonerated Pope Francis, and it would have shown that he jumped the gun and rashly misjudged Pope Francis and spread lies all over social media, doing the bidding of, once again, the false accuser of the brethren. All right, let's continue.
All the way around in the circle because of this picture right here. Who's this young, handsome priest on the screen? That's a young Father Taylor Marshall. I wasn't a Catholic priest. I was ordained an Anglican priest, the same religion as these guys right here. Where's my, this is the right button. Yeah. Here's a tweet from Nick Donnelly, Pope Bergoglio.
So this is a Catholic deacon who does not believe that Pope Francis is Pope. And so clearly he has some very, very serious issues with his communion with the Catholic Church. But he says Bergoglio has allowed Anglicans to say Mass in the Lateran, the mother of the Catholic Church, once again, joining in spreading false information, saying that Pope Francis allowed this. He says, would he allow the SSPX to celebrate Mass at the Lateran or even allow the traditional Latin Mass? I think not. Bergoglio is a liberal Protestant and not a Catholic. So they immediately rushed the social media to falsely accuse Pope Francis, which is, again, who does that? The accuser of the brethren. That's who does that. He not only accuses people of sins they actually committed, he also accuses people of sins they didn't commit. So, not surprised, however, to see Nick Donnelly doing this, given how much he hates Pope Francis and does not believe that he's actually the Pope. But for some reason, Taylor Marshall thinks this is a reliable source of information to show this on the screen. So
has allowed Anglicans to say Mass in the Lateran, the mother church of the Catholic Church. Would he allow the SSPX to celebrate Mass at the Lateran or even the traditional Latin Mass? I think not. That's what we're going to talk about today. Now.
Okay, so let's skip to the 4-minute mark. Let's see, where Taylor Marshall tries to respond to people who anticipate objections and say, well, maybe Pope Francis didn't know. Let's get his take on that objection. Here's what he says.
Gave authorization for Anglican clergy. Here's some of the details for y'all. The Vatican gave authorization for Anglican clergy to celebrate, scare quotes, Mass at St. John Lateran.
Which, as I'm going to show in a moment, is 100% false. The information he is spreading here is misinformation, and he did not do due diligence in verifying whether this information was true before disseminating it all over social media. And it's not just his audience that was impacted. Again, the enemies of the church are now using this against the Catholic Church to mock the Catholic Church. They are watching this stuff and they're using it as ammunition against the Catholic Church.
Cathedral. Pope Francis later greeted the group after his weekly audience. So I don't want to hear this, well, we didn't really know. There was a breakdown in communication.
There you go.
And not. They knew.
So he's saying because Pope Francis met with them, he had to have known and approved of it, which does not logically follow. I mean, the Pope has all kinds of things that he is doing, all kinds of things on his daily agenda, meets with all sorts of people and doesn't necessarily know of everything that is approved of or allowed. Perhaps he should get some better people in charge of those things. That's my opinion, but it doesn't necessarily prove, just because Pope Francis met with these individuals, that he was aware that they did this or even approved of it. That does not logically follow. You have to demonstrate that. And in fact, now the Vatican has actually come out and said otherwise, which is a very curious thing. Frankly, I didn't think that they would come out and say anything, which is kind of sad, because they should say something. And in fact did. But you'll see that here in a moment. But let me finish this part of the clip.
They knew and they allowed it. It was authorized.
There, you heard it. It was authorized. They knew, allow it, authorized. Once again, the accuser of the brethren is at work. Let's see where the accuser begins to really stir people's passions up in dissent against the head of the Catholic Church. Which, by the way, if you're not familiar, stirring people's passions up based on a lie is not a good thing. All right, let's continue.
I didn't pick up. Man, it's too bad, because I was on fuego, spitting fire on this topic. You know,
Taylor Marshall thinks that he was spitting fire on this topic. He believes that his mic wasn't picking him up entirely. So he's going to repeat what he was saying.
Hear me? Did y'all hear me? Do I need to repeat it? Looking for y'all in the comments here.
What was that guy from P. Diddy's group or whatever? Dylon, because I spit hot fire. Taylor Marshall thinks he was spitting hot fire. Actually, no, he was just promoting lies and false accusations against the successor of St. Peter. Very serious issue.
Okay, you could hear. Good. Sorry about that. I got so wound up, I didn't even check to see if my mic was in the right place. It was over here.
Okay.
Since the 1970s, traditionalist Catholics, why are we even calling them that? They're just Catholics. Catholics who want the traditional Roman rite have been bullied, labeled as schismatics. And
no. Pope Francis doesn't label anybody who prefers the Tridentine liturgy as schismatics. That is 100% false. Pope Francis still allows for it in certain conditions. So that's not the case. He's been very clear. What is schismatic is those who are trying to use the Second Vatican Council against, well, they're trying to use the Second Vatican Council as a rupture in the church and trying to say that tradition teaches contrary to Vatican II. And so we have to get rid of this council. And this council teaches heresy. And we need to disobey our leaders on these liturgical, the liturgical implementation of the Second Vatican Council. That's what he's talking about. But of course, Taylor Marshall misrepresents the Pope here.
What's crazy is, I like the traditional Latin Mass, but there's no way if I had a pilgrimage group and we went to Rome and said we would like the traditional Latin Mass in St. John Lateran, they would be like, oh, that's great. We're just so happy y'all here. Yeah, we'll set it up and y'all can have a traditional Latin Mass at St. John Lateran. No way that would ever happen. But if I came as Father Taylor Marshall, Mr. Ecumenical, this guy right here, I can have a Mass, even though I'm invalidly ordained? Did I wake up and take some crazy pills this morning?
Of course, that's not the situation, but you can see he's stirring people up. And if you look through the comment section, the live chat for this video stream, people have their hair on fire and they are freaking out and they are saying all kinds of nasty things about the Pope and the Vatican, and it's all based on a lie.
Now, I've been to St. John Lateran many times, maybe 6, 7 times. Every time I go, I make a devotional.
All right, let me actually stop there before we continue. Let me read to you the articles demonstrating that this is a lie first before we continue moving forward, and then I'll review the rest of his video. So here is one thing to consider. This is from Catholic News Agency. Again, if Taylor Marshall had just waited one day before disseminating false information, he would have realized he jumped the gun. Vatican blames failure in communication for Anglican service in Pope's church in Rome. So there was a failure in communication. And in fact, the Pope had absolutely nothing to do with it. He was not aware of it. None of the dicasteries had anything to do with this, in fact. This is completely on the individual who is over the Basilica of St. John Lateran's. And even him, there's some questions as to how much really he knew. Maybe he had some other people that he put in charge. Looks like the people who are in charge of booking at St. John Lateran's, whoever made this mistake probably needs to be fired, and you need to get somebody more reliable. Just FYI. if you're booking people who aren't actually valid priests and bishops to celebrate liturgies on a Catholic altar, you might need to get somebody else in charge. So there's certainly some fault here with whoever did it, but it can't be blamed on Pope Francis or any of the dicasteries that represent him, frankly. Okay. So about 50 Anglican clergymen who are not in communion with the Catholic Church took part in religious services at the highest ranking papal basilica in Rome on Tuesday, April the 18th. The Vatican later released a statement of regret attributing the incident to a failure in communications, which I'm just shocked they even issued a statement clarifying. Honestly thought that they wouldn't say anything, which I think would be the wrong move. Thankfully, they did the right thing, and they came out and said this was regrettable and this should not have been authorized. Okay, good. But let's just make sure this doesn't happen again. Can we do that? That'd be helpful. The clergymen who were accompanied by Bishop Jonathan Baker of the Church of England are part of the Anglican communion, which broke away from the church in 1534 amid King Henry VIII's frustration that he could not receive an annulment for his marriage. The Catholic Church does not consider Anglican holy orders valid. That's per Pope Leo XIII. And that would be a secondary object of infallibility, by the way, a dogmatic fact, and does not recognize Anglican orders as valid, which means they cannot validly celebrate the Mass. That's true. This is not actually a Mass. It would be no different than me simulating a sacrament as a layman. The Anglican service was celebrated at the Archbasilica of St. John Lateran in Rome, which is the oldest basilica in Rome and the official seat of the Bishop of Rome, the Pope. In a statement issued Thursday, Bishop Guarino di Tora, who serves as the vicar of the archpriest of the Lateran Basilica, said the incident was the result of a failure in communication and that he expresses deep regret for what happened. Basically, I'm not saying that he was aware, this bishop was aware, the vicar archpriest was aware of what took place, but the guy that he has under him who are responsible for booking, they need to find another job. Get somebody else, please. Bishop Guarino. Let's find somebody who knows what they're doing. Because if they're booking people who aren't actually priests, that's an issue. So ultimately, it is with this group of individuals who are responsible for this regrettable incident. It can't be blamed on Pope Francis and somehow he knew and he approved and the Vatican approved, or even any of the dicasteries. So you can clearly see, again, Taylor Marshall went out, jumped on social media and completely spread a lie and stirred people's passions up against Pope Francis, as we'll see here in a moment, even questioning whether he's actually the Pope, all over something that wasn't even something Pope Francis knew about. I'm sure Taylor Marshall wouldn't appreciate it. And I'm sure all the people who spread this misinformation wouldn't appreciate it if others did the same thing to them. Guarantee they wouldn't like it. So why do it to others? The statement said that a group of about 50 priests, accompanied by their bishops, all belonging to the Anglican Communion, celebrated on the high altar of the Cathedral of Rome in contravention to the canonical norms. De Tura also explained that the regrettable episode was caused by a failure in communication. Pope Francis met with Baker and the other clergymen on Wednesday morning, but it is unclear how or why they were given authorization to conduct a religious service at the Archbasilica. So he met with them, but that does not logically follow that he was aware or approved of these things. The Anglican clergy who took part in the service are Anglo-Catholic. Despite the name, the group is in communion with the Anglican Church and not in communion with the Catholic Church. Anglo-Catholics tend to hold more traditional views than the Anglican Church as a whole, such as opposition to ordaining women. Well, we have some conflicting information here because during the video, Taylor Marshall says that a woman priest was present, but if these were actually Anglo-Catholic Anglicans, they would not have approved of a woman priest. And so we do have some conflicting information between what Taylor Marshall is reporting and what CNA is saying here about the group. So let's also look over here. Rome Basilica apologizes for allowing Anglicans to celebrate Mass, has a little bit more information. Let's see here. Okay. A breakdown in communication led by permission being given to a group of Anglican clergy to celebrate the Eucharist in Rome's Basilica of St. John Lateran, said Auxiliary Bishop Guarino de Tura of Rome, vicar for the Basilica's chapter. Anglican Bishop Jonathan Baker of Fulham, a suffragan bishop with responsibility for Anglo-Catholic parishes in the Diocese of London and Southwark that have been requested not to be served by a woman priest or bishop, celebrated the liturgy April 18th as part of a conference in Rome for the Anglo-Catholic clergy. A statement April 20th from the Lateran chapter said Bishop de Tura expresses deep regret for what happened last Tuesday, April 18th, inside the Basilica of St. John in Rome. And I'm glad he expresses deep regret. That's good. This should not have happened. And it's fair to ask, well, how did this happen? And who do you have that's responsible for booking? And what should you do about this? In fact, a group of about 50 priests accompanied by their bishop, all belonging to the Anglican Communion, celebrated at the main altar of Rome's cathedral, contravening canonical norms. Benedictine Father Martin Brown, an official of the dicastery for promoting Christian unity. So an official from one of the dicasteries noted the apology but said, I also think that everyone acted in good faith and without intent to cause offense or embarrassment to anyone else. And that's probably true. I'm sure whoever made this ridiculous decision acted in good faith. I have no reason to believe otherwise, but simply acting in good faith is not good enough, right? There are so many scenarios that I can think of that are objectively harmful, not helpful, confusing, and yet people may still have good intentions in doing them. That still doesn't take away from the fact that, yeah, but this shouldn't have been done. That the celebration has caused comment is perhaps above all else a reminder of the need to pray continually for the Lord's gift of unity. Sure. But it's also a reminder that maybe we should get some better people in charge of scheduling for St. John Lateran Basilica and avoid this confusion. And also a reminder that Anglicans don't have valid orders. That's also a reminder from this situation. So that all may be one day celebrate the same altar, the saving mysteries of the Lord. The Vatican Directory for the Application of Principles and Norms on Ecumenism states that Catholic churches are generally reserved for Catholic worship. Father Brown stated in statement April 20th. However, he said it does not rule out celebrations by communities not in full communion with the Catholic Church, although it does say that such hospitality can be offered when other Christians do not have a place for liturgical objects necessary for celebrating worthy their religious ceremony. So that would apply to like Eastern Orthodox, Oriental Orthodox, Assyrian Church of the East, or something like that. I can see that, but not Anglicans, since they don't have valid orders. At least most of them don't have valid orders, unless one of those bishops received their orders from an Eastern Orthodox bishop, or Oriental Orthodox bishop, or perhaps some of the old Catholics that still, the few of them that still have retained valid orders. So on the whole, Anglicans don't have valid orders with those exceptions that I just mentioned there. So while visiting Anglicans could have celebrated at the Anglican parish in the center of Rome, well, let's see, hold on. While the visiting Anglicans could have celebrated at the Anglican parish in the center of Rome, so they could have gone and celebrated at one of their own parishes. Father Brown said the directory also encourages a certain reciprocity, since sharing in the spiritual activities and resources, even when defined limits, is a contribution and a spiritual mutual goodwill and charity to the growth of harmony among Christians. Yeah, but that kind of misses the point that they don't have valid orders. So I I think Father Brown needs a little catechesis here. One presumes that the request was granted in that spirit of reciprocity, welcoming what was clearly an Anglican pilgrim group. Sure, I imagine that was the intention, but given the fact that they don't have valid orders, whoever made the decision needs some better catechesis, right? He said, in the same way, many of the great historical cathedrals of the Church of England occasionally welcome groups from other churches, including the Catholic Church, to celebrate the Eucharist, and such hospitable gestures are always appreciated. Sure, but it's not necessarily equivocal, because the Anglicans believe that Catholics have valid orders, but Catholics don't believe that Anglicans do, at least most of them, as I noted. So it's not exactly the same thing. Again, I think we need some better training in catechesis here. Still, he said it would have been more appropriate if this dicastery and other relevant entities of the Holy See had been involved in considering the request. Absolutely. I think the dicastery, one of the dicasteries, if not the Holy Father himself, should have been involved in making this decision, which would have been a firm no. But since they weren't involved, and this shows you they weren't involved, Pope Francis wasn't involved, and none of the dicasteries were involved, you can't blame this on Pope Francis or any of his direct representatives in the dicastery. You could certainly blame whoever scheduled this. Father Brown also clarified that the celebration took place in the apse, which was clearly roped off with staff on duty throughout the celebration. No members of the public nor anybody else was present or nearby, so there was no chance that a pilgrim or tourist could have attended and thought it was a Catholic mass. That helps mitigate the problem, but it's still a problem, right? I'm glad that there weren't Catholic tourists there who were present who tried to partake in communion, since it wouldn't have actually been communion. That's good, but it shouldn't have happened at all. But this does go against what Taylor Marshall was saying in the video, where he talks about, well, what happens if, all the tourists who saw this, well, there you go. There weren't any. Not that it makes it a whole lot better, though. Okay, so with that being said, let's resume the video where the accuser of the brethren continues to promote his dissent against the Catholic Church and Christ's vicar on earth. Let's go to the 10-minute mark. Right around there. Okay. And by the way, again, let me know if you cannot hear it.
The 13th, buried in this hallowed church, even begin to understand that Pope Francis would allow heretics, schismatics who have invalid orders to celebrate a fake Eucharist with fake clergy. So yeah, I look at these pictures of my young self as an Anglican priest, and I'm simultaneously kicked in the crotch with a knife in my heart right here. And it's just...
And he shouldn't be, because this isn't something that Pope Francis did. But again, this just shows the lack of objectivity here. He's incredibly emotionally driven all throughout the video. You can clearly see him expressing the fact that he's personally wounded over this. Since he felt personally wounded, he wanted to rush to YouTube to get back at Pope Francis by stirring people up against him. And guess what? He has egg on his face today, because it turns out, Pope Francis didn't approve it. And now the enemies of the church are using his words against the Catholic Church.
Turning back and forth. If I could talk to Pope Francis, if he could call in right now on the show, I'd be like, why should I have become a Catholic layman?
I wish that conversation had taken place, because he would have rebuked you on your own show and told you that you rashly judged him. I would have loved that. I would have just sat there and watched it with some popcorn, and I don't ever eat popcorn, but I would have been like that Michael Jackson meme where he's eating popcorn in the movie theater, dressed up in the Thriller garments. I would have completely been that guy, right? Watching Pope Francis rebuke Taylor Marshall on his own show would have been the most surreal thing ever. But alas, it did not happen.
Or should have just been this guy, Father Marshall, celebrating Mass at the Lateran. What's going on here? Is the teaching of Pope Leo XIII in Apostolic Cure saying Anglican orders are invalid? Did that somehow, was that false?
I'm going to have to go here. Pope Leo is right? This is a secondary object of infallibility. It's a dogmatic fact that cannot be overturned unless somehow the Anglicans reintroduce valid apostolic succession into their holy orders by getting ordained by Eastern Orthodox or something like that. They don't have valid orders. So what Leo XIII is saying is a dogmatic fact. It is infallible. Check out the commentary on the Profession of Faith, where Ratzinger and Bertone note this. It's a secondary object of infallibility. It's part of the second paragraph of our Profession of Faith. But let me go ahead and flip this around on Taylor Marshall. Taylor Marshall is questioning whether or not Pope Francis is the Pope. It is a secondary object of infallibility that Pope Francis is the Pope. It's the exact same category. That Pope Francis is the successor of St. Peter is a secondary object of infallibility. So to put that into question would be no different than what he's accusing Pope Francis of, which would be he's accusing Pope Francis of putting into question Leo XIII on the validity, or I should say invalidity, of Anglican orders. He's doing the exact same thing, but just on a different subject. Meanwhile, it turns out that Pope Francis didn't actually do this. But what we do see on this video and previous videos where he puts into question whether or not Pope Francis is the Pope, he's actually guilty of the very thing he's accusing Pope Francis of doing. All right, let's continue.
Holy Spirit come and change things? God of surprises? I'm going into questions and comments right now. Want to hear from y'all. As you can see, this hits a little close to home.
Right, which is, again, why he rushed to social media to bash Pope Francis and spread a lie.
I hope.
Luke says, I do hope Taylor Marshall makes a correction. I hope he publicly apologizes to Pope Francis and his viewers and also goes to confession. I agree. But I haven't seen him do that yet. This has been something that has been habitually happening on nearly a daily basis from Taylor Marshall. And if it's out there, I just haven't seen it. I haven't seen him correct him. These grave errors on his part. But I don't know, maybe things will change. Maybe he'll start doing that.
Someone out there in the Catholic world, send this video to Pope Francis. Say, here is a man who loves the traditional Latin Mass, who loves the Catholic Church.
I don't buy that. I don't buy that one. Loving the Catholic Church does not include rushing to social media to stir people's passions up against the vicar of Christ. That's not loving the Catholic Church.
Doesn't want to be in schism with the church.
I'm also not buying that. A person who constantly puts into doubt the election of Pope Francis is not somebody who is trying to eagerly preserve communion with the Holy See.
Who wants to be an obedient and submissive son to the...
Not buying that one either, obviously. It's not obedient to spread false information about the vicar of Christ.
Roman pontiff. And he was an Anglican priest, and he's seeing what you're doing in Rome, and he's confused, and he is betrayed.
Oh, I wish somebody would have sent that to Pope Francis, and we would have got a response from him. Let's go to the 15-minute mark here. Well, I guess we can just continue from here.
All right, going into your comments. Oh, also, I don't know if it's true. It's being reported. LifeSite reported it that the...
If LifeSite reported it, it has to be authentic. Probably one of the worst places to go for any kind of reliable and factual information from a Catholic news source. Probably the worst place to go.
Bishop who celebrated this Mass is a Freemason, an open Freemason. I don't know if that's the case. I just saw it on LifeSite News. If that's the case, It's just, it's even worse.
And if that's the case, yeah, it is even worse on the people who allowed this to take place. But don't blame Pope Francis for this.
It's even worse. All right. Cindy Crocker. How could these Anglicans even think they could ask for this permission? Maybe it was offered to them by Francis. I don't know. And I want right now, I want the Society of St. Pius X to write a formal request to have a pontifical high mass at St. John Lateran.
Laying the rhetoric on really thick, all based on a lie. Truly sad.
Photo ops. Anathema. Anathema.
Oh, yeah,
Anathema.
this is the wonderful part where he anathematizes once again Pope Francis. This isn't the first time we have a late anathema from Taylor Marshall against Pope Francis. This is at least the second time that he's anathematized the Vicar of Christ, which certainly has some implications for his own standing in the Catholic Church.
Photo ops. Anathema. Anathema. And we're going to let Protestants, heretical clergy that are not only invalid, they deny 5 of the sacraments. They have women ministers up on the altar, and then Pope Francis is going to meet with them and shake hands with them. Photo ops. Anathema. Anathema. Anathema.
A thrice anathema, man. I mean, even the Council of Trent, even the Council of Trent only gave 1 anathema at the end of its canons, right? He added 3 of them in there. That's a pretty big deal there. It's an interesting concept of lay anathemas. Now, I wonder if people are allowed to now anathematize Taylor Marshall for his denial of secondary objects of infallibility, or accusations that Vatican II teaches heresy, or for his false teachings that he spreads on social media and YouTube and stuff like that. I wonder if this is a two-way street, or if he's the only one who has a monopoly on lay anathemas.
Confirmed. This is, I guess, a critic of me. Not a fake mass, but a liturgy. They are going up there with bread and wine and saying, this is my body, this is my blood. It either transubstantiates or it doesn't. And Pope Leo XIII says it doesn't.
And he's right about that. This would be the simulation of a sacrament. Now, obviously, the Anglicans who have these invalid orders, presumably, I don't know this bishop's particular succession. I don't know, like, if he received his ordination from, like, Eastern Orthodox bishop or something like that, or one of the few old Catholics that still has valid orders. Like, I don't know his particular succession, but I'm just speaking generally. Most Anglicans don't have valid orders because of what Leo XIII noted there. So assuming that he's one of that group, this would be the simulation of the sacrament, even if that alleged bishop, intends to confect the sacrament. Like, I could, in good conscience, well, I suppose I couldn't personally because I know better, but there could be a layman who could, in good conscience, think that they could confect the sacrament, but objectively, they would be wrong if they don't have valid orders. So, I mean, maybe their intentions were good in thinking that they, can confect the sacrament, but if they don't have valid orders, and again, the majority of Anglicans don't, then yeah, it's a simulation of a sacrament, objectively speaking. And so this should not at all take place on a Catholic altar. In fact, even those who have valid orders should not, in most cases, be allowed to use a Catholic altar, with some exceptions, like an Eastern Orthodox bishop in some cases who doesn't have the ability to celebrate or something like that in one of his parishes, and he's in town or something like that. I could see extenuating circumstances in those cases. And it kind of goes both ways. Sometimes they'll allow us to do the same.
That's called a fake mass. So it's not a lie, it's the truth. Or you can say Pope Leo XIII lied. That's on you. Francis extends his hands to neighbors as our Lord taught us to do. No, he doesn't. He doesn't extend his hands to traditional Catholics.
Watch this part. Somebody tries to play devil's advocate here, and is just trying to say, well, maybe Pope Francis is just trying to extend mercy to people and extend his hands, even though, again, Pope Francis had absolutely nothing to do with this. But they're trying to play devil's advocate. What's interesting to me is Taylor Marshall cannot even conceive of that as being possible. He is so biased in his hatred and resentment towards Pope Francis that he can't even conceive of this being hypothetically true. Watch this, because it shows a lack of objectivity with his commentary on Pope Francis.
That's on you. Francis extends his hands to neighbors as our Lord taught us to do. No, he doesn't. He doesn't extend his hands to traditional Catholics. He shuts us down, bans us, silences.
More rhetoric and lies here. Traditional Catholics, he certainly extends his hands to, but those who are promoting dissent and schism and lies on social media, yeah, those people he doesn't extend his hands to, and he's trying to correct them, and rightly so. I agree with Pope Francis in trying to correct them. I don't necessarily agree with how he's going about trying to correct it, because I think that the way in which he's trying to do it, some innocent people are caught in the crosshairs. So I do kind of have some disagreements with how Pope Francis is going about it, and also whether he's consistently applying this to some of the dissenters on the left. I think there needs to be some more consistency there. But here you see Taylor Marshall playing the victim and just trying to say, look at Pope Francis. He's not extending his hands. He doesn't extend his hands to us. Well, I'm sorry, but you guys are constantly bashing him on social media every single day and lying about him. What do you expect him to do? Maybe change your approach. Stop lying about Pope Francis. Stop dissenting against the Catholic magisterium. Start actually affirming the Catholic magisterium. Stop stirring people up with fear and hate and resentment and bitterness. Stop leading people outside of the Catholic Church by causing them to go into despair. And maybe he'll treat you a little differently. Just my thoughts. I don't know.
This is us. Prohibits us, restricts us. Don't give me this, that he's this merciful, extending the hands to his neighbors as Jesus did. No, he's not. It is a double standard right here. The entire world right now can see it.
The only thing the entire world is saying, at least for the very small world that's actually watching Taylor Marshall's videos in this video, what they're saying is that Taylor Marshall is spreading lies. That's what they're saying here.
The Anglicans, Protestants, fake orders, fake sacraments, they get extended hands. Those who are preserving the Roman rite, they get a hand to the face. Coco Ugoto, you're way off, bro. Way off. No time for that, Coco. God bless you, but no time for that.
Okay. All right. He doesn't like Coco's comment there. Okay. Let's go to the 40-minute mark. He gets a jab of spreading the Pachamama lies. He inserts that into this video. Let's check it out.
Ill rigids. More heresy. Where's the Pachamama? We had Pachamama at St. Peter's. Now we got Anglican fake mass at St. John Lateran.
So if you want to see why Taylor Marshall and others in the industry of papal slanderers and accuser of the brethren, if you want to see why they were wrong, I'm going to put a link in the show notes as soon as this is no longer live. I'll put a link to it. In fact, the title of the show is the Pachamama incident or something like that. Just type in Michael Lofton, Father Deacon Dragani, Pachamama. It'll come right up. And you'll see where we go through the Pachamama ceremony play by play. We talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. We criticize some aspects of it, but we also show that they turned it into something that it actually wasn't, and they continue to spread lies about it to this very day, as we're seeing here in the video. So, of course, they bring up Pachamama, as you could expect. Let's go to the 17:30-minute mark, where you're going to see Taylor Marshall once again misrepresenting Vatican II, which again shows that this isn't just a problem with Taylor Marshall spreading lies, slandering Pope Francis. There's some serious doctrinal problems with the content of Taylor Marshall as well. Let's hear the slander that he levels against an ecumenical council.
Obviously, the Pope recognizes the Anglicans as part of the Church, Vatican II in full effect. I mean, if that's Vatican II, it just can't be the case. How can they be in the Church in 1970 or to 2023 and outside the Church in 1570?
It's hard for me to believe that Taylor Marshall is genuinely asking that question and is this unfamiliar with the very basics of Catholic ecclesiology. It's very hard for me to believe that. So I really do have to question whether or not there's some sincerity here. And generally, I don't question a person's sincerity. I always give them the benefit of the doubt. But I know that Taylor Marshall knows enough about the basics of ecclesiology to know better than what he just said. This is Ecclesiology 101. There are grades to Catholic communion, and that has always been the case. It's not an on and off switch. There are grades and levels to Catholic communion. A person who is baptized a Protestant has a certain degree of communion with the true Church of Christ compared to a pagan who has never been baptized. An Eastern Orthodox has greater degree than just a Protestant who has been baptized, right? And way more than a pagan. But he does not have, the Eastern Orthodox doesn't have the fullness of unity with the Catholic Church. So there are degrees of communion. This is basic ecclesiology 101. I'm not sure how he could honestly ask this and present this as if Vatican II is really wrong on this point. Vatican II is not coming up with something new here. This is a very basic concept that rests on several things. Number one, the condemnation of the heresy of Donatism. You would have to be a Donatist to really put this in question. And also the concept of, for instance, baptism of blood or baptism of desire. Perhaps catechumens who die before they're baptized. We would consider them having full communion. This has always been the case. This isn't something new to Vatican II. And all Vatican II is saying there in Lumen Gentium, in this idea of ecclesiology that it's saying about non-Catholics, it's really resting on those two things: the validity of sacraments, of baptism outside of the Catholic Church, which again is contra the heresy of Donatism, and also the fact that somebody could participate in the life of the Church imperfectly extra-sacramentally, such as catechumens who died before baptism. So I honestly don't know why he would present it this way, and just throw Vatican II under the bus instead of steel manning it in this kind of way. It's hard for me to believe he really believes what he's saying here, since he knows better.
How does this make sense? It's heretical. This whole thing is heretical.
So once again, he is calling the concept here in the ecclesiology that Vatican II puts forward, which is, again, not innovative. He's calling it heretical, which isn't the first time he has accused Vatican II of teaching heresy. That is a serious doctrinal problem that brings all kinds of canonical and theological censors and penalties upon Taylor Marshall for accusing a ecumenical council of teaching heresy. So it seems that he hasn't learned from that mistake, and he's continuing to repeat this error about Vatican II. I found this comment really odd. Let me go to the 25-minute mark. I thought this was very weird. He comments on why he's not a Catholic priest. This is incredibly unusual. Let's go to the 25-minute, 12-second mark.
Yes, I can. I started that process when I converted. I discerned that it was not the right vocation for me, but I could be a married priest, but I don't really believe in a married priesthood.
Another theological problem, which I was very surprised to hear Taylor Marshall say. I could totally see him saying, like, I think that the Latin rite practice of mandatory priestly celibacy is a better discipline than allowing for married priests. I could see somebody arguing that, but I don't believe in the married priesthood. Excuse me, this is a discipline that goes back to the apostles, and it's a discipline that the Catholic Church has always allowed. It doesn't consider it ideal. That's fine. That's no shocker. And even those who use married priests don't consider it ideal. So Eastern Catholics who have married priests recognize it's still not the ideal. The ideal is for a priest to be celibate. But I don't believe in it. So wait, you don't believe in apostolic practices that the Catholic Church has always allowed and tolerated and does not consider evil? You don't believe in that? What kind of Catholic is this? This is just odd. The theological errors of Taylor Marshall continue to grow by the day, it seems. Let's go to another part where I hear some more theological errors with his comments on the Anglican Ordinariate, which is a liturgy approved by the Catholic Church of Catholics who are in full communion with the Catholic Church. Let's hear his comments on the Anglican Ordinariate's liturgy, which is a beautiful liturgy, by the way. If only your average Novus Ordo could be celebrated as your average Anglican Ordinariate liturgy, you wouldn't have the radical traditionalists that we see right here. They wouldn't exist.
People generally, they have communion on the tongue, ultra rails, reverence, ad orientem. So it checks so many boxes. In fact, the Ordinariate Mass really is a unicorn when it comes to reverence. So I respect that. I like that. But if we're going to talk about Thomistic precision, dogmatic precision, we have to realize that the Ordinariate liturgy is a blend. And I just don't feel comfortable with that. Secondly,
by the way, I see somebody say, I'd like to hear him clarify this. I don't think Tim would be willing to be straight up condemn the East practice of the married priesthood. Yeah, I'd love to hear him clarify that. But the problem is Taylor Marshall is guilty of the very thing he constantly accuses Pope Francis and others of, and that is not clarifying his own ambiguities. You constantly hear these guys accuse Vatican II and Pope Francis of being ambiguous and they need to clarify themselves. I've seen Bishop Schneider do this, and yet Schneider, Taylor Marshall, and others, they never show that same attitude for themselves whenever they engage in ambiguities themselves. I haven't heard them. If it happens, I just haven't seen it. They tend to not come out and clarify themselves. Maybe he'll do it. Maybe he'll hold to the very standard that he holds Pope Francis and Vatican II to, and then again, maybe he won't. We'll see. But let's continue.
Having been an Anglican priest, and I have those liturgies still mostly memorized because I said them every day, it's a bit schizophrenic for me because those prayers, when I pray them and those rhythms of prayer and the diction, I have internalized as an Anglican cleric, and I've tried to get away from being an Anglican cleric and being a Catholic layman. So for me, I believe the Ordinariate liturgy, which I've attended, but I just kind of feel that it's uncomfortable and maybe a danger to my faith.
What? A liturgy approved by the Catholic Church that is good and holy may be a danger to his Catholic faith? Another theological problem. The liturgies that the Catholic Church approves of themselves cannot contain elements, objectively speaking, obviously they can be abuses, but objectively speaking, cannot contain elements that are directly harmful to souls. Another theological error. I just couldn't believe that he threw the Anglican Ordinariate under the bus like that. Okay, though. All right, let's continue that part, though.
I try not to talk about it too much because I don't want to offend people, but that might be the most clear and open I've ever been on the history of the podcast about the Ordinariate liturgy.
Well, if that came out, I wonder what other things that he tries to not talk about and other theological errors that he maintains, and he doesn't mention them because he knows they could be controversial. Gee, I wonder.
Again, not judging people. There's some people who are way holier than I attend it and like it, but it's not for me or
and it may be harmful to his soul.
My family.
But it may be harmful to his soul. Got it. All right. Let's go to the 31-minute mark, where Taylor Marshall is going to give an individual advice on why to stay Catholic. Because as you can imagine, and as I encounter daily, people who often watch Taylor Marshall and other content are constantly wondering why they should remain Catholic. Gee, I wonder why they have that question. Here's his advice on why to remain Catholic. I thought this was interesting. Let's watch it.
It's helped me to keep my faith. I'm a convert since 2019. Hey, look, you keep your eyes on this horizon with all of this nonsense. You see heresy, confusion,
which his show does constantly. It always keeps the horizon on this, right? On the controversies, on the lies, on, the slander.
What you need to do is you take your horizon and you look up. This is why I say pray the rosary every day. If you don't pray the rosary, you're not on the team.
So that's his solution, as you're going to see here. The solution is, you know what? Just pray the rosary. Keep your eyes on praying the rosary. That's going to solve things. That will keep you Catholic.
Pray the rosary because that keeps you daily. Just like if you don't work out and keep your muscles, you're going to atrophy and eventually just lose all your muscle strength and tone and become weak. What you have to do is you constantly have to be moving around, right, to keep your body strong. Well,
and this advice is generally true, right? I mean, you want to train your soul just like you would your physical body. That part is true.
It's the same thing with your soul. You constantly have to be raising your spiritual focus to the Father,
which his videos don't do. They constantly bring you down to lies and slander and misrepresentation and misinformation. And he'll throw in maybe an Our Father at the end in Latin.
And the Son and the Holy Ghost, the Blessed Virgin Mary, who's depicted right in front of me right now under a crucifix. That's what I'm always looking at when I'm talking to y'all. And St. Joseph and John the Baptist and the 12 apostles and the holy virgins and the martyrs. So we have to be focused on that because that's our destiny that God's put before us. That's our hope, like our life, our sweetness and our hope. That's what we're going for.
All right. So I thought that was pretty terrible advice overall because it's not going to help the people that are being led into despair due to his content. Simply praying the rosary, although the rosary is a great thing, that will not keep you Catholic in and of itself. There are Anglicans who pray the rosary every single day. That's not going to keep you. They're Eastern Orthodox. Some of them even pray the rosary. Some of them hate it, but some of them pray the rosary, believe it or not. That won't keep you Catholic. There are plenty of people who pray the rosary every day and then leave the Catholic Church after watching Taylor Marshall habitually. That's not going to keep you Catholic. Is it good? Is it helpful? Sure. Is that alone going to solve the problem? No. Here's some advice. Turn off schismatic content. Turn off the stuff that is leading you to despair. Turn off your Taylor Marshalls who are constantly spreading lies and misinformation and slandering Pope Francis and others. Turn off those who are teaching false teachings on Catholic YouTube. Turn those guys off. Touch grass. Go to liturgy. Pray. Read scripture. Get some good catechetical resources. But turn off this garbage. You'll feel a whole lot better. That's my advice to you. And that's the advice he should have really been given. Simply praying the rosary. I'm sorry, that's not going to keep you Catholic. It might help, but that alone is not going to keep you Catholic, as the track record for Taylor Marshall's viewers demonstrates. A lot of them end up leaving the Catholic Church and going to Eastern Orthodoxy and going elsewhere. They're just going agnostic or whatever. That's not good enough. I want to go to another part here, the 35-44 minute mark, where he once again calls into question Pope Francis and whether or not he's actually a pope, which again is a denial or putting into question of a secondary object of infallibility, which certainly puts Taylor Marshall, at the very least, his own canonical and communion with the Catholic Church in question. Let's see, 35-44.
Do I regret leaving that and becoming the Catholic layman? No. Am I injured? Am I hurt that a putative pope would allow Anglican clergy?
Putative pope. So basically saying somebody who is allegedly, claimed to be the pope. He's putting it into question. He's not outright denying here, at least. He's not outright denying Pope Francis is the pope, but he is putting it into doubt into question. What if you were to say the first council, the first ecumenical council, the putative first ecumenical council, or the putative teaching that Anglican orders are invalid, to use his secondary object that he loves to speak about in this video? What if he were to say that? Wouldn't he be then guilty of the very thing he's accusing Pope Francis and others of? Yeah, he would be. Because the certainty that Pope Francis is the Pope is the exact same category and level of certitude that Pope Leo XIII used whenever he declared objectively and overall Anglican orders to be invalid. It's the exact same level of assurance, exact same category. To put Pope Francis's election into question is no different than put Leo XIII and his judgment on Anglican orders into question. Because the bishops of the church have accepted him, and the faithful as a whole have accepted his canonical election. So even if he wasn't canonically elected, the universal and peaceful acceptance of Pope Francis makes him canonically elected, makes him the Pope. This is just very, very basics when it comes to the election of the Roman pontiff that you can see well established in the preconciliar era. So I find that ironic since he's guilty of the very thing that he accuses others of. And what does this do? That then puts and sows seeds of doubt into the viewers. What does the enemy do? The enemy will often sow seeds of doubt. Did God really say? It's exactly what's happening here, and it's truly tragic to see it.
To go up on the most privileged church in Rome and commit a sacrilege? Yeah, I am. Like I said, kick to the crotch, knife in the heart, twisting all day long.
All based on a misunderstanding.
But the Catholic faith is the pearl of great price.
The irony, he just doesn't get it. He doesn't see it. Okay, let's explain it. Let's break it down. Protestants believe that. Orthodox believe that. Catholics believe that. Everyone believes that about the Church of Christ. What they're going to ask is, but why would I be in communion with a Pope who hates me and is allowing for this and may not even be the Pope himself, right? May not actually be the Pope. That's what people are going to say. And he doesn't really address that. He just kind of still assumes the Catholic Church while maintaining a wacky ecclesiology that makes no sense. I want to go to something that he said earlier at the 5-minute mark. It was kind of an off-the-cuff remark, but I thought it was still worth addressing. This is the 5-minute, 30-second mark. Let's see what he says.
The traditional Latin Mass, the traditional baptismal rite, traditional confirmation, traditional ordination, 1988. Traditional extreme unction, traditional matrimony.
I like the DJ air horn sound effect. That's a nice introduction into TM's podcast. I've used it myself before.
And they have been slapped, talking about confirmation, they have been alapad and slapped ever since 1970 and said, well, my microphone's been.
All right, so did you hear that? He called it traditional confirmation, traditional baptismal rite. It's not a huge deal, but I do have to sneak this one in. Really? Traditional confirmation? Really? Look, I'm not knocking Latin Rite Catholicism. What it has done by separating confirmation from baptism, it's not evil, it's not sinful. It's totally understandable, historical, how that happened in the West. So I'll defend the Latin Rite and its administration of the sacraments against Eastern Orthodox who will try to use this against Catholics. I'll defend Latin Rite Catholics because I don't think that somehow this is a theological error or is sinful or is not understandable. But come on now. Don't call it traditional confirmation and traditional baptism when it's not. It's not. Traditional baptism and confirmation is administered to infants at the same time, not separating the two. Again, it's understandable how they were separated in the Latin West. And again, I'll go to bat for Latin Rite Catholics over and against the Eastern Orthodox, but don't call it traditional. Please don't call it. Recognize it for the innovation that it is. Some of these innovations that happen in the Roman Rite are understandable. Some of them were even necessary in certain circumstances, as far as a discipline perspective. It's even necessary in their case. I don't know if some of them are still necessary now, but it's understandable how they were necessary historically. But stop calling it traditional when it's not. It's a liturgical innovation, an understandable one, but call it for what it is. But this kind of rhetoric for people who don't know the history of the liturgy and the history of the sacraments are really going to interpret this stuff as, the way it's done in the preconciliar church is the traditional way. It is the way of doing things. When I kind of have to chuckle and think, it's just as innovative as some of the things that you condemn in the post-conciliar church. It's just as innovative. Stop calling it traditional when it's not. It's an innovation. It's a liturgical departure. It's a liturgical modification. It might be justified, might be understandable, might have even been helpful in some context. Okay, but just call it what it is, a liturgical innovation. Don't call it traditional. I just had to throw that one in there because it's just like, wow, really? The kind of rhetoric that they use and the language they use is just so interesting to me. I want to go over a few sacred scriptures that I think should be considered here. I want to take a look at 1 Timothy 6, 3 through 5. Let's go to that. Let's see here. Let's see. Let me open up my verbum. Let's do it that way. Takes a second to open here. I'm going to look at 1 Timothy 6, 3 through 5. Should have already had this open. Sorry. Okay. There we go. Let's consider the wisdom of Scripture. Beginning with verse 3 of chapter 6. If anyone teaches a different doctrine and does not agree with the sound words of our Lord Jesus Christ and the teaching that accords with godliness, he is puffed up with conceit and understands nothing. So one of the things that false teachers do is they are conceited, understand nothing. He has an unhealthy craving for controversy. False teachers have unhealthy preoccupations with controversies and for quarrel about words, which produce envy, dissension, slander, evil suspicions. What's evil suspicion? That's when you assume the worst case scenario without justifiable reason, such as assuming that Pope Francis approved of this and then going out and disseminating it. This is what the false teacher does. And constant friction among people who are depraved in mind and deprived of the truth, imagining that godliness is a means of gain. They use godliness in religion and exploit it to get money. And I also want you to consider a few others here. Let's go to Proverbs 6, 12 through 15. Proverbs 6, go to 12. A worthless person, a wicked man, goes about with crooked speech, winks with his eyes, signals with his feet, points with his finger. With a perverted heart, he devises evil, constantly or continually sowing discord, problems, stirring up issues. Therefore, calamity will come upon him suddenly. In a moment, he will be broken beyond healing. I think we need to learn from what Scripture is saying about those who stir people up, constantly sowing discord. If this is what we're engaging in, this is going to be our lot at the end of the day. Also take a look briefly at Proverbs 29, 22. A man of wrath stirs up strife, and one given to anger causes much transgression. One who's given over to anger, bitterness, resentment, they're going to stir up sin, stir up transgression. They're going to stir people up, stir up their passions, get them slandering people, get them lying about people. This is what a man of wrath does. And then lastly, Romans 1:28 through 29. Those who exchange the truth of God for a lie. It says this about them. And since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a debased mind to do what ought not to be done. They were filled with all manner of unrighteousness, evil, covetousness, malice. They're full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, maliciousness. They are gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, foolish, faithless, heartless, ruthless. Now, obviously, those who are exchanging the truth for a lie are not all of these things at once. What Paul is saying is, as a whole, as a group, these are the things that they're struggling with. Those who exchange the truth of God for a lie. Slanderers, gossips, malicious, strife. People who are promoting strife, insolent, boastful. These are things we have to watch out for, because there are so many people on social media promoting this kind of stuff, and we have to be aware of it. And we can't wonder at the end of the day, well, why am I struggling with faith? Why am I falling into despair? Well, we're watching content that exchanges truth for a lie. Maybe that's why. Anyways, hope this has been helpful. If so, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. If you are confused about what is going on in the Catholic Church, completely understandable with so much misinformation out there and with legitimate concerns and actual problems in the Catholic Church, completely understandable. If you're a confused Catholic or you're not a Catholic at all, you're just looking into the Catholic Church, but you're hearing the enemies of the church using this stuff against Catholics, I want you to check this free ebook out. I'm not even selling it. I'm giving it to you for free. I don't want your money. I just want you to read this because I think it will help you. It's called Church Chaos. Go to reasonandtheology.com. You'll get a free copy. You'll see a pop-up that comes up. Click on it, put in your email, and you will get the book right then and there. Free PDF. Church Chaos, Biblical Insights for Confused Catholics. I'm going to walk you through some scriptures that shows where the covenant people of God in the Old Testament struggled with some of the things that we're currently struggling with in the Catholic Church. And then I give you biblical advice on how to properly respond to it. And I'm not just going to tell you to pray the rosary. Praying the rosary is great, but I'm going to give you biblical insights on what you need to do that goes beyond, hey, just pray the rosary and just think everything's going to be okay. No. Check this out. Biblical Insights for Confused Catholics, reasonandtheology.com. All right, that's going to do it. We'll see you later. God bless. Are you confused about how Catholic teaching authority works? With encyclicals, papal bulls, councils, and many other things, it's easy to get confused on what is authoritative and what is not. Fortunately, at maximusinstitute.com, I have prepared a course explaining the magisterium from A to Z. Visit the website and check out the course Understanding the Magisterium for more information. Hey everybody, just wanted to tell you about my new free ebook, Church Chaos, Biblical Insights for Confused Catholics. If you are a confused Catholic and you're thinking about leaving the Catholic Church, or you're thinking about converting to the church, but you see that there's a crisis in the church and you're just unsure, this is the book for you. Again, it is free. Just simply go to reasonandtheology.com. You'll see a pop-up that comes up on your screen. Just simply click on it and you'll put in your email and it will provide you the free PDF ebook right then and there. Please check it out if you're confused about the situation in the Catholic Church today. reasonandtheology.com. Hey, thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button and the subscribe button. See you next time. God bless.